I've seen there's been a lot of chatter around something that's been a lot more painfully obvious this season, the leveling system, which is nothing new. It's I said it before, it's antiquated, but as I also said, I think it's something that is very difficult for Bungie to do drastic I wouldn't expect to see any drastic changes to the leveling system anytime soon. As much as I wish they would, it's kind of just a core part of the game, and hopefully they do some tweaks to just make it less grindy. But just the power grind, doing milestones is, especially like I always say, the more you've played the game, if you've been grinding milestones and grinding the power level, light level, whatever you call it, gear score level, whatever the various names it's been throughout Destiny, it feels like a massive grindy obstacle in the way of doing the fun stuff. And I know there isn't a whole ton of content, so Bungie does it as a means to kind of extend the shelf life of the season. But I feel like you shouldn't the leveling you shouldn't be having to power level that much in seasons. I feel like maybe once or twice a year, but in seasons it just feels like it's like, oh, again, all right, these milestones and tier 1s and tier 2s and infusing stuff, and you got to check your level. It just, doing that 4 times a year is just exhausting, and it's just, yeah, it was what most people are kind of unanimous on. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I think that when it comes to leveling, the replacement system for whatever it may eventually turn into needs to be designed by someone far smarter than I am.
It'll take a lot of work.
Yeah, this is a core structural problem of the game, and honestly, like, if I'm looking for a quick fix, I'd say that we only grind 20 power on every other season. So like this season only 20 power, next season 50, one after that in the summer 20 power, and then back to whatever it is for Witch Queen, where you do grind a large number of power.
Yeah, it's like 1600, I think, like 200 levels or something.
Right, something like that I'm okay with. But if you're looking at what leveling is effectively stopping players from doing, it is effectively, let me rephrase that. If you're looking at what leveling is a band-aid for, it's a band-aid for both loot and encounter design. So to give you an idea of what I mean, players, if they're looking to stick around and play Destiny, play it for an incentive. And that incentive, more often than not, ends up being loot. Loot in either the form of a power increase or a gun that they really value. The thing is, Bungie needs to design guns that are valuable for encounters and allow them to really allow players to feel like they are powerful in a lateral sense. So I think a really good example of this is if you're trying to solo Shattered Throne. I have a hand cannon that I specifically leave aside for that, which has now been sunset, but I mean, assuming the encounter has not been brought up to light level, I'll still be able to use it. And it's a Kindled Orchid that has Disruption, Break, and Shield Disorient. And the reason I have that is because those two combo together, along with a really powerful kinetic, to allow me to very quickly kill the wizards in that. Now, that's just one example, but it means that I'm chasing a role for a weapon that isn't predominantly Rampage, or multi-kill clip, or frenzy, or any of these DPS increasing perks. You know, whether that's a reload speed increase, or whether it's a damage or a rate of fire increase, or something in between. Predominantly, you're looking for something that allows you to make a certain part of an encounter more doable. That allows you perhaps to exercise another part of skill. This is the two sides of the problem. They need loot that encourages that with perks that give people more opportunities to face unique encounters and unique bosses and unique enemies that need to be tackled in a certain way. Because right now in Destiny, I think the key problem is that everything that you fight, you know, for the most part, like, it's not everything. I'll grant there's definitely differences for this, but a lot of things are damage sponges, you know? And that's not to say that they are the bullet sponges of the Division or Destiny 1 vanilla. It's to say that the problem can be solved more or less by throwing a lament at it. You know, there isn't too much complexity to it. It is admittedly done with damage gates, which means you need to probably kill an ad or throw the thing at the thing, or, you know, dunk the thing in the hole, or whatever it may be. You know, there's a thing in the middle of the encounter that you have to do that is a mechanic. But the encounter's enemies themselves are in a very weird place where they don't necessarily encourage players to use an alternative strategy with alternative perks. So, and I feel like Bungie is in a little bit of a bind there, because this will always be a problem as long as they need to make mechanics and encounters simple enough for players to address. Like, really simple way of summing this up is they need to compensate by creating more complicated encounters, which then require better loot to address them. And not better in terms of power level, but better in terms of having perks that allow players to be laterally more powerful. It's a very complicated way of saying it, but not everything should be a damage sponge, and therefore not everything should be about how much damage you can do via how high your power level is.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned bullet sponge. That's a phrase that brings me back to 2014-15. That was one of the most common complaints and criticisms about Destiny, the term bullet sponge. It's kind of funny, you'd obviously never hear it now, but yeah, I guess most of the enemies were just Valis to Arc, just a big tanky dude with a bunch of health. But bullet sponges don't really exist now, because the Lament will carve through anything. If it's a bullet sponge, it's gonna die pretty much.
Yeah, we're at the healthy end of the spectrum, which is things are killable. I'd say the healthy end of the spectrum as it gets harder is definitely things are killable, but you need these tactics and this loot to do it. That I think is where Destiny needs to go if it really wants to evolve itself and go beyond a power grind. Champions are a very decent first step to that, but I think that there are better ways of doing stuff than just having champions. To give you an idea of the way that changes things up, champions are good because they aren't just meat sacks that you can throw the Lament at every single time and they'll win. Like, yes, you can do that with quite a few of them on the difficulties. But if you're in a GM, you are in a position where certain champions are going to require certain pieces of loot that are better than others. So one of my favorite examples is in a season where we have anti-barrier weapons on our primaries. Weapons that have disruption break, Vorpal weapon, and I think Genesis are actually better and more strategically valuable, as well as auto-loading holster. Because what you can do is you can break the champion's shield more easily or leave them with a debuff after having broken them. And that's the kind of lateral encounter design that I'm trying to reference and trying to think of. These weapons aren't good because they have a flat damage buff. Vorpal weapon is a very specific damage buff that happens to proc against champion shields. And it's only 15%. It's inferior to Rampage on one stack. It's inferior to Multi-Kill Clip on one stack. It's inferior to Swash on 1 or 2 stacks. Like, this is not a good damage buff on its own. But what it happens to do is it happens to be very specifically good against this one specific situation. And so having a weapon with it is really valuable. Similarly, can you imagine a boss where you would need to do damage over time to it, and therefore something like, say, a Vortex Grenade is a really great idea, but throwing a Lament at it is immediately going to cause it to lock down or do something, or spawn an attack that would immediately kill you in close range. It's one of these things of saying, like, we need different ways of killing the boss, and we need different ways of ensuring that as we kill the boss, it's not simply sitting there and taking all this damage and just dying so quickly that there isn't any challenge to the mechanics of it.